Commence primary ignition.
I'm just not the hero type, clearly.
What a piece of junk.
Enterprise, this is the captain.
I got a bad feeling about this.
It's all part of the plan.
Engage.
Welcome back to Podcast Super One. I'm your host, Donovan Thompson, with my co-host,
Daniel Wingfield.
And today is episode 150 of Podcast Super One. And of course, no better way to celebrate than to bring in Dr. Bruce Hutchinson.
I'm so happy to be back, especially after that extended time since we did episode 149.
It was a long time ago, honestly.
Yeah,
I don't even remember what we were talking about, if I'm being honest.
No.
Viewers, if you didn't know, our last episode, part one of our Endgame breakdown, Avengers Endgame. This is part two, and we're fixing to dive right into it. But of course, if you didn't know, and you probably didn't, we are sponsored by Kapow Comics, located at 4047 East Kill Avenue in Sherwood, Arkansas. There they have comic books, collectibles, graphic novels, and of course, special guest appearances throughout their year. If you didn't know, Ray Park, Darth Maul from Star Wars Episode 1 and a few other projects, he was at Kapow Comics a couple of weeks ago, and you missed out because you don't go to Kapow Comics and you don't follow our channel. So that's what happens when you don't.
Just like I did.
Just like Daniel and I did. Yeah.
I'm not going to say that they forgot to notify their sponsors, but
yeah. Anyway, of course, if you haven't hit the subscribe button, notification bell, that way up to date on all future episodes of Podcast 2 for 1, as well as all the cool content we have at youtube.com/2for1 studios, the best place to consume the content. All right, guys, Avengers Endgame. Sorry, folks, if you don't know the first part of this, go back and watch the first part of the this episode. And so last time we picked up was Ronan was being reintroduced, right? We saw Hawkeye in the first 5 minutes, Clint Barton, and we pick up in Tokyo, and he is slaying Yakuza, and we get a great oneer, right? With Hawkeye doing his thing, and of course we get the classic line, "Don't give me hope, Natasha." And so Natasha
and
shows
a great
up.
cameo by the Yakuza guy. I can't remember.
Oh, great! Yeah, he's fantastic. Honestly, it's like it sucks that they used him in that because now maybe they can reuse him later. But he's a great actor, and I wish he'd got some bigger role than some bad guy that's in there for 2 minutes. You know.
Yes.
But yeah, so we get Ronan back into the fold, right? And then we're back at the Avengers compound. We're at minute 58 now. And we start kind of discussing more time travel rules, like Baby Thanos with War Machine and some time travel rules there. And then they end up kind of figuring things out a little bit. And Hawkeye says, "Look, I'll test it out." And he does a test run. He goes back in time, and he gets to hear his family in the background before getting yanked back and proven Tony's theory about time travel. And how it works. So then we start getting into, there's nothing we're going to dispute there. I think we're kind of all in agreement. We're just kind of talking about plot now, right? I mean, nothing too crazy. Yeah. We get into right at the hour mark, the time heist, right? Which is kind of the start of what I consider the MCU celebration. And we're broken into three camps. We're broken into New York, which is basically Avengers 1, right? We have the Time Stone, the Mind Stone, and the Space Stone are there. Then we're broken into Asgard, which is Thor, the Dark World, right, which is where the Reality Stone is. And then we go to Morag and Vormir in 2014, which is during the time of Guardians and the Galaxy. So it's a great way to get three different camps now, or three different timelines and stories. Obviously, the New York one has the most stones, and has the bigger characters there. So we're going to kind of follow that one throughout the whole thing. But this is where we kind of get to celebrate the MCU. And I'll say this. We've talked about this before, Daniel and Bruce. I think there would be a fun experiment to watch the movie up to 1:05 and then cut all this out and then watch them come back immediately from the time heist. And then, we learn with them. Like, we learn, oh shit, Natasha didn't make it. How did she not make it? You know what I'm saying? There's a fun experiment there to shave off a good 45 minutes to an hour. And I kind of wonder, we would lose some things, of course. We would lose mainly kind of the setup with kind of where Steve's headspace is. But overall, it's really just us revisiting things throughout the MCU. And we also get to see Thanos too, and kind of how he gets to come back. But other than Thanos, there's nothing in here that's really super important to the overall plot other than the explanation of the time stones and how they work in accordance to time. Anyway, general thoughts. You guys go.
Well, that's interesting, but of course, I mean, this act is sort of the classic MacGuffin act of, of the movie, which is, we need this thing to do this thing, and we're going to spend a whole act of the movie getting the thing, right? And so, like you said, in a lot of ways, it depends on the team. We've got different teams doing different things. And so you mentioned the New York team, but the New York team splits up, and Hulk goes and talks to, or what is the name of that character?
The ancient one.
The ancient one, right? And honestly, that is probably the least interesting. Back to your complaints about the Hulk getting sort of bad service. I mean, he just sort of, we cut to him and he has half the conversation, and then he comes back. We go back to him much later, and he has the second half. The more fun stuff happens with Tony and Cap, and then Scott is involved with all of that too. And we have a lot of different sequences. We come back and forth. We'll talk about the sequences in a minute, but we do get fun. We get Cap fighting himself. We get some of the fun stuff with Tony and Scott working together. And then, of course, later on near the end of the act, we're going to get the more emotional side of things where Tony and Cap have to jump even further back in time. So we're going to get some character stuff with Tony and his father, right? And then with the other teams, it's interesting, as much as it's plot, how much we're still developing character. Team 2, Rocket and Thor, is almost all, again, character stuff, right? It's sort of comedy and character stuff with Thor and his mother, and then we get, I guess, the third team, but again, they split off too, right? So we get Rhodey and Nebula, and we get Natasha and Clint. And Rhodey and Nebula is actually where, like you said, Donovan, is where the real plot is happening, because that's all the stuff unfolding with Thanos. And he ends up being a big definer, I think, of how the sequences play out. And then, of course, we almost ignore Natasha and Clint until near the end, because, of course, that's going to be our first super big, emotionally difficult moment of the movie, right? So it is, you're right in a way, but it is funny when you actually look at all of the characters, how much other things are happening that are more character oriented than plot oriented, because you're right. The plot it doesn't matter. It's just, we're going to do blah, 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 blah. And then somehow we'll end up with the stones, and it's sort of the most predictable part in a way from a plot perspective, because we kind of know, right, that they're going to come back with all of the stones. This is just how it has to happen. So it's sort of, well, how can you make that interesting? And it's a combination of nostalgia, comedy, but a lot of character moments and character development.
Yeah, they don't waste any time, right? Like you're right in that, like, it is a MacGuffin act, but like it does feel like every scene with each character besides Hulk has a real purpose that either is adding to the character's internal arc, or is the climax of a character's internal arc, or all these things. And I think even the stuff that happens with, like, Tony and his dad, is like a really, it's not necessarily directly related to Tony's internal struggle, like in this movie or anything, but it is still like, you feel like you're getting meaningful moments with these characters and and like moments that you care about. And I think that's not an easy thing to do when you are chasing MacGuffins for 30 minutes to give us scenes that we remember and like and enjoy.
I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead, Donovan.
Well, I was gonna say, I first of all, I want a blanket statement say that, like, there's no universe that I would take out this hour of the movie, because this is why I watch the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is because of this hour right here. You know what I'm saying? This is the callbacks, this is the celebration of what we've been watching for 10 years. But it is interesting to think about, what could the movie be if you just took this out and you watched it, and, like, could you still keep up with it in some way? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
There's something there, because even Tony says, like, time messes back. It's like, that almost could be a good enough reason for Thanos to be just showing up if you don't see his plot happening in that thing.
Sure.
Time travel. Who cares? But go on, Bruce. Now I'll start kind of going through some of the things I think are important here.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think one of the other interesting things about this, and as we talk about the structure, I think we'll deal with this even more, is that, and just projecting ahead, I think pretty obviously that the act is going to end when, they all come back, they all have the stones, they're briefly devastated by the loss of Natasha, but they snap the fingers and everyone returns. That's going to be the end of the act, right? So it's like a little over 50 minutes. But what's interesting is by the time we get to the end of that act, we're going to be, 2 hours into the movie, and there's been almost no action. In fact, this is the action act. And yet, even when you look at each individual thing, the only time there's ever really any action is really Cap fighting himself, and maybe a little more largely just sort of everything that happens at the Avengers headquarters when they're sort of tracking down the staff stone or whatever, and we have a little bit of fighting there, and then we have the big fight between Cap and Cap. But you get 2 hours into the movie, and this is an action movie that has had no action, which I think in some ways, and of course we're going to have a ton of action in the final act, but in some ways I think is a good thing is a tribute to the movie that it's held, everyone's attention as a sci-fi action movie for 2 hours without any action, or with very little action.
I think that's a good point, and something I hadn't really seen in that way. I think for me, I think it maybe makes sense why because everything that they are doing all leads up and supports the onslaught of action we're about to dive into. Right. But I think, I think that is I think a credit to it. Like you said, that we have these MacGuffin chasing, and they're all character kind of internal arc moments, right? And we care the whole time. You know what I mean? I really think there's, again, even the Bruce and the Ancient One scenes don't bother me because they're so short. So they're over so quick. I don't even have time to get bored of them almost. And so it is a tribute to it that it's able to, for one, bounce around from 5 or 6 different teams once they all split up, keep it interesting, keep it meaningful to the characters, to these internal goals and struggles, and just keep it interesting to us as the audience.
Well, part of the key, I think, Dan, that you sort of alluded to there is that this third act, I think, is the most similar to Infinity War in terms of its structure, where we send out all of the characters on different missions, even though they're all variations of the same mission, which is they're all getting the stones. But we cut back and forth between them quite often. And I think that's sort of key to the propulsion of the act moving forward. I mean, you're kind of saying it's like a tribute that they could juggle all of that, but you almost have to have done that, right? I mean, imagine if it was just 2 teams, and somehow they were going to try to maintain 50 to 55 minutes of the movie just cutting back and forth between 2 plot lines. I think they would start feeling a lot more plotting, especially if they didn't have action, so the fact that and I'll just tell you, I've had 3 sequences in act 1, 3 sequences in act 2. I've got 6 sequences in act 3 because things are bouncing around so much more, and the units are so much smaller because it's sort of here, and each thing is this little piece. And I think the fact that it's sort of cutting more quickly between plot lines and that there are more plot lines is what drives us through that 15 minutes pretty rapidly, despite the fact that, like you said, there's just MacGuffins and not a lot of action.
It's obviously not, but it's almost one might say this is the Bourne or the Taken 3 editing style of narrative plot. It's not, because there's a lot more care put into
over
this.
A fence, but it is moving back and forth between a lot more plot lines than they have done in the first hour of the movie, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, It does. Well, it absolutely works. And again, this is the kind of the bread and butter of the MCU is seeing these combinations, getting to revisit the older versions of the character. And real quick, I want to kind of talk about some of these highlights. So one, we get the classic Hell Hydra in the Winter Soldier scene, but it's the reverse.
That's great.
Right? They get to play with these kind of things like Hell Hydra, which is a huge thing. When Winter Soldier came out, like it shook the whole MCU. Like Hydra's been there the whole time, you know? Obviously, we get the setup for Loki and Disney Plus. Right now, I'm sticking with the Tony Cap side of things. We get Cap versus Cap. So we also get America's Ass, which is a great little thing there. And I can do this all day. Like, yeah, I know. You know, it's a trope that's been playing out throughout the MCU, which we got. I actually like Bruce and Ancient One because I'm always interested in how the time travel of movies work and how they're trying to explain it. So after this movie, I had my napkin on a table and I had a pencil and trying to figure things out. And
I think it's also good just because Tilda Swinton's like a really good actress, so she carries it a lot, really.
And it has some interesting things. And what's really interesting, we won't dive into that because the directors and the writers disagree on how the time travel works. And then now that we've been into phase 4, the universe is even more confusing. These
guys should have had a phone call for. They would have solved so many problems. Yeah.
Oh, I know. Yeah. But I think that's some. Yeah. So that's the fun stuff there on that part. We'll get to the emotional stuff. Thor and Rocket, of course. Again, this is to me kind of like almost the thesis of the movie kind of being presented to us is what is a hero, right? And how well do you succeed at being who you are? Tony is, his whole life he was trying to be this selfish person, but he ends up being this, this martyr, this someone who ends up who is willing to lay his life down. That Cap even told him, you're not that guy in Avengers 1. Cap is this guy who's been this selfless person his whole life, and someone who, maybe I have done enough, and maybe I deserve a little bit of happiness, right? And then Thor is this guy that he's been told his whole life he's supposed to be this king and this hero and this protector, and he's like everybody else. He's got issues and problems, and maybe that's not what it's right for him, even though it's what everyone's telling him. So to me, this is the thesis of the movie a little bit.
I want to ask you about that and get you guys' thoughts on this as bigger experts than me. I feel like in the first couple of Thor movies, and again, I haven't gone back and looked at them, but I don't remember having a sense of Thor being uneasy in following in his father's footsteps. I mean, in fact, if I remember correctly, in the early movies, he was eager to follow in his father's footsteps and was too eager, and was starting the war with the ice giant. I don't even remember, but he was getting too far ahead of the game. And so one of the things that kind of has thrown me a little bit is when do you see, I mean, other than just this idea that he failed as a hero in stopping Thanos in the previous movie, what is it about him that is questioning being the leader and maybe being sort of this more carefree? I just didn't feel like that was necessarily a part of his character early on. And I'm wondering from you guys' perspective, where you think that came from.
Well, Thor has had the most dramatic changes amongst the MCU characters. That's because they haven't known what they do with him. And also the box office speaks to that, right? I mean, those did well, but they didn't do as well as Cap and Tony. And so they obviously Ragnarok come in and kind of change that. But you're right. The first movie, he's eager for the throne. And he ends up kind of learning okay, I want it, but I'm not ready for it. Two, I still think is maybe besides, I don't know, Love and Thunder is kind of pretty low now, but Thor the Dark World
of the worst, right?
was for a long time. Thor the Dark World was the worst MCU movie. It was always the worst. And this movie actually kind of almost made it a little bit better.
Right. I think I like Dark World better than the Love and Thunder personally.
Yeah. I mean, it honestly, he has probably more of an arc in that movie, which is not much there to begin with. But it's an interesting question. But also, I think out of any MCU character, he suffered loss the most. And I think he lost his dad, his brother, his mom, his people, his home planet. You know what I'm saying? Then he failed.
His brother
stopped. Yeah. And it's the thing that, it's why I argued last time, Bruce, Infinity War, is that because he wanted that kill thing, because he wasn't being attentive and in there at Thanos. Well, to me, well, I think it's editing again still, but he showed up when Thanos showed up. But
Right.
you know, he had the big battle cry. He was looking for Thanos and killing people instead of like trying to do it immediately, right? When, you know, where's he at when Thanos first shows up? You know, so I think it's like this is the folly of his failures, you know, and I don't think it really answers your question, but
No, I think to go to your question, Bruce, I think it is pretty much just set up from his failure of Infinity War and where we pick up with him there. And so in that, it isn't, I wouldn't say it's a strong like theme of the movie or theme for Thor. It's a great line. and it's delivered really well, and it feels applicable to kind of a lot of these heroes, I think, in a lot of ways. But I do think it is, I think Donovan's right, them having struggled with Thor kind of in just who's in charge and where he's going and what he's doing. He doesn't really have a consistent arc like Cap or Iron Man does, where you can trace it from movie one to this one.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think,
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of all the above, probably, unfortunately. And I think even Hemsworth is kind of not got the hint, but I think he feels it too, based on his comments recently.
I think the response to Love and Thunder, yeah, I think they're all probably.
I freaking hate not like it. I own it. I've watched it 3-4 times. I hate not loving an MCU movie. It just pisses me off. It just, you know, it's like the worst thing, honestly. But you can't deny how fucking awesome it is that he is still worthy at the end of that sequence.
Oh, yeah.
Which leads us into the second team. The music kick, that's the perfect song also. And when you hear it, you're like, at that point, you're like, you kind of almost forget about the Guardians other than Rocket being there. But you hear that song, you're like, oh, it's a goddamn good song. You're like, oh shit, we're fixing to be at the beginning of Guardians of the Galaxy, which is an amazing opening to any of the MCU movies. And so we get to celebrate that too. And what a, you know, fun thing to poke at, you know, Peter Quill, you know, oh, he's an idiot, you know, and they just knock his ass out, you know, in the beginning of that. So, yeah. And that's kind of where the meat, I think, plot wise is this section of Nebula basically syncing up with her other self. And then Thanos, past Thanos, a more aggressive, not even aggressive, but it felt like this is the Thanos that is, I mean, it's not that he lives really old, like he lives forever basically. So I kind of have a hard time thinking like he's just much different, like 5-6 years later. But the way, the way they kind of paint it is that this one is, you know, at least the writers did also some baseball, inside baseball, but he was more manifest destiny in the Infinity War. You know, the way he kind of acts like this is my destiny and it's always going to happen. I think in this one, it's kind of like it feels like he's younger, more aggressive. He feels like he's a little more, you know, angry and, you know, more tighten on the ground kind of thing. At least that's just my impression of it, you know.
I see that. I mean, a little bit, just in his interactions with like the Nebula and like he's just harsh, very harsh the whole time in this film. Versus the first one where he kind of has these moments of like tenderness with Gamora. And even like with sacrificing Gamora, he's a bit more of a character in Infinity War. He's kind of an antagonist in Endgame. Yeah.
This is also an interesting plot line because, you know, first of all, it pairs Rhodey and Nebula, which is another really weird pairing. Although I guess if we had Iron Man and Nebula, then, you know, sort of War Machine and Nebula kind of is parallel a little bit.
Yeah.
But, but also, I think, you know, I mean, I know Rhodey's a more minor character, you know, but he, you know, he kind of gets short shrift because Nebula's plot line really turns into earlier in history Nebula's plot line. You know what I mean? Right. And then we get Gamora back and we get Thanos. And so actually almost that entire plot line with that team is actually with them, you know, getting the message from the earlier Nebula's sort of mind lock with her future self. And so we sort of forget about Rhodey until right at the end, you know, when sort of history catches up with itself. So yeah,
doesn't he just he leaves. He escapes right after they get the stone from Quill, right? And that's when she stays. She gets he goes back. He goes back and he like they win the mission. He's like, all right, let's go back. And they hit the button, and right when he does, he zaps back, and she gets hacked or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's just gone, right?
So he finishes really quickly. He's the most successful one.
Yeah.
They just come and punch
in a positive
him.
way. He got his job done immediately.
The most efficient and responsible Avenger.
Yeah, 100%.
And I do like the they had an interesting chemistry, Nebula and Rhodey, because they're both kind of just dry and like Nebula's plays everything straight, and then Rhodey is just kind of I just like the way he plays this version of Rhodey. Yeah,
he's like, man, this stuff's just really weird. This whole situation, it's just that's how he kind of acts. But
Rhodey inside is like, why am I the one who got stuck with Nebula, and why is there not anyone else with us?
100%.
Yes.
So I think the three big things here we'll jump to this last section here. The three big moments. One is Steve seeing Peggy throughout the window, right? That's his emotional connection there, and that kind of reminds the audience that kind of like, hey, in case you forgot, Steve had a love interest a few movies ago, and this has kind of been on his mind.
He did look at her picture, I think, in the beginning of this movie. Doesn't he? Look at her picture once?
He did. He did. It's okay. Sorry, Daniel. And then the other thing, of course, is we get to have that cathartic moment with Howard and Tony, right? Which gave me also one of my favorite quotes, period, ever. It's no amount of money ever bought a second of time, which is funny because it kind of did in this case. Because he's super smart, and he had his intelligence did it, but because of his wealth probably helped get him the education he needed, right, to figure out time travel. So he does figure out. It's irony, but it's still a great quote. And then there's another thing from Howard here. It's interesting. Howard says, "The greater good has rarely outweighed my self-interest," which is something that Howard says, and so it kind of tees up right there again. Tony's sacrifice in the end. I think it's also a great callback to have Jarvis there, which is from the Agent Carter TV show, that he was the same actor in that TV show that Marvel also doesn't consider canon, but it's still a fun little thing there that the writers of this actually wrote that TV show, actually.
I really love the actor that plays Tony's dad. I can't remember. I mainly know him from Mad Men, but
he's great.
He has. That's different than who they had in Iron Man 2, right? They had a different actor.
No, it's the same guy.
Okay. Did they change at any point, the dad?
Dominic Cooper is the young Howard Stark in First Avenger. Yeah,
that's right. No, he just anyway. I agree. I like that scene a lot.
Yeah, and so the last bit here, of course, is Natasha and Clint, and it's really like we get the same spill from Red Skull we did in Infinity War, the same location, almost same shots. And it's kind of like they're presented with a problem, and it's kind of like, okay, we know one. It's what's interesting too is that when the heist starts, we know that they're going to encounter Red Skull at some point, and it's kind of like, who does it? And so you kind of almost dread that whole 50 minutes there of like, okay, we kind of know one of these guys are going to die. At least we think they could, and so that's the last scene, which is smart too, right? To kind of go right from that really sad moment right to everyone's assembled again. So of course, throughout their thing, did you guys anticipate either which one dying, or Natasha dying, or Clint dying, or what?
I was sad that Natasha died. I would have rather had Clint die.
Personally,
just because I would have preferred more movies with her. But
I mean, I think once we knew who was going to Vormir, it made perfect sense. Like the most. I don't know. They're not the most damaged characters, but they have maybe the most sordid pasts in terms of just what
as they say.
Yes, and I really loved the Natasha's performance, or I'm not gonna say her name.
Scarlett Johansson.
I think her performance is really good here, and I think Clint's fine, but I think she really steals the show, and it's a really. It's one of those things where I can't recall who I thought in the moment, who I thought who was going to die, but At the same time, it's like you have pretty good chances. It was going to be one of them, right? And
Well,
so
and dramatically, it makes sense that it's her because we've
Yes.
set up so carefully Clint's family earlier on, and we know that Natasha's only family is the Avengers. So
yes, and
Yeah.
I think it works very well. I think it's a very heartbreaking scene. A very, I mean, it's a nice gut punch right before we kind of dive into the action of kind of the rest of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, that's, obviously what's interesting too is the way the time travel works is that, you could have everyone leave at different points of their time, but they're all going to arrive at the same point, right? So,
right.
like the best example is Rhodey. He leaves pretty early and all these other things are happening, but he's still arriving at the same time everyone else does because obviously it's the same time, literally.
Right.
So, that's a nice little way to kind of, everyone comes together at the same time. And yeah, it's interesting that Nat is the one that gets killed. I was kind of surprised because she is a female character and there are many female characters on the original. She's the only original of the original
Sure.
5 female character. And I was like, wow, they actually did it. And I think it might have maybe also been just a reason why they did it. It's like, well, no one, people won't expect this. It'll be a bigger gut punch than Clint. And I mean, I don't know. It's interesting. I'm very surprised.
I feel like she's also just been a more important character than Clint.
Yeah,
kind of.
yeah.
Since
She
the
has,
beginning.
she
Oh
has
yeah, for sure.
Appearing in Iron Man 2, or I guess was it Iron Man 2 was her first one?
Yeah, it's Iron Man 2, yeah.
And so obviously showing up there, and then just her involvement in the Avengers movies has always been bigger than Clint's ever was. So I think it also makes sense in just that, like, Clint dying is kind of a bummer. And then Natasha dying is like, oh no, you know what I mean?
Right.
And
Yeah, no.
that one makes more sense in terms of like, what are you trying to do to the audience here?
Yeah. So, I mean, after that moment, we kind of get that small cathartic scene when like Hulk throws the bench, which, that's like his big loss in the movie too, because Hulk did have a relationship with her in Age of Ultron, which a lot of people really didn't like, which I actually was okay with.
I was too.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know why.
I was fine with it.
They
He went to space for like 5 years, and then they just never mentioned it. It was just weird how they left it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it just.
Well, they
started
didn't
it, and then
because
you're just like, oh, never mind. He goes to
Yeah.
space.
So we get from that to like, okay, who's gonna do the snap sort of thing, and of course Thor immediately offers himself up, and the idea, he's like, he's damaged, he just wants to right the wrong that he did, and there's a debate, and he's the strongest. But of course, because the stones emit gamma radiation, the best person to do it is the Hulk. And it's kind of like, obviously, I think it's super smart one to add those little tidbits in there. And it does make him feel more important. It does make him feel like his presence is also manifest destiny. Like he had to be there for this to happen. I don't think it's
really
strong
like
enough.
His line, it's like I was made for this. He's like almost muttering to himself, like this real.
Yeah.
I think that's his best moment in the film because it really feels like an important moment for. It feels like he's realizing that at the same time as we are, and like I don't know, it feels powerful even though it's really short and small.
I agree. And of course, we get the snap, and it's perfectly timed where Thanos comes through the time portal the same time all this stuff is happening, and we get the hint that obviously the sky is brighter, butterflies are back. Clint gets a phone call, which I'm like, man, that's some damn good service. 5 years disconnected.
Who calls him?
His wife does.
Okay, but then who? Okay, never mind. Okay, yeah, we'll talk about that one later. Sorry, I was thinking of a different time.
So from that moment, like it's all kind of happens really quickly. Thanos attacks, right, and he blows through the Avengers compound, lays waste to this place, and then it's for a few minutes here. It's kind of everyone picking up the pieces of where everyone's at. And then we get probably one of the coolest things in the MCU is whenever, I'm kind of skipping over some stuff here, but after they kind of go through the rubble and stuff, Thanos kind of sets up shop. He's like, look, they're going to come to me, right? They need to come to me. And this was in the main trailer for the movie. You have they're called the Trinity in the Marvel comics for a reason, right? Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man. And so you had them all together. Thor does one of the most badass things he's ever done in the comics, and they brought it to the screen, which he gets the will of both Mjolnir and Stormbreaker at the same time. That's what comic book movies are made of right there. Also, fun facts, Iron Man is wearing like the most comic accurate first armor he's ever had in the comics in this movie. So it's also badass. And also Cap is wearing the most comic accurate suit he's had in the movies with the scales on his thing. So it's just like comic book heaven at this point, right? And they're all there and they're watching Thanos and like what is he doing? Absolutely nothing. Like, well, we're all under agreement that, you know, we're going to kill him, right? And like, okay, let's do that. And then the shot when they're walking to Thanos and you see their legs, and you see the cape and the boots and the armor, and you see Thanos in the background. One of the coolest fucking shots in comic book history. It's just like, it just gets your comic book dick hard. It's pretty incredible. So that's amazing. Anyway.
No, I mean, like, you know, this back hour, I've watched more times than I've watched the whole movie, just because it is a bunch of great action mixed with a bunch of really fun fan service and character moments, and I think I'm excited to get into it because this is the fun part.
Well, yeah. So before we do, can I just run through, since we've been tracking the sequences, kind of the Act 3. So it is interesting to me because we do get 6 sequences in that third act rather than the 3, at least the way I break it down. And like I said, I think what's interesting about it is the way that Thanos becomes sort of the climax of multiples of those. So the way I had it laid out, for me, sequence 7 was an hour and 7 minutes until like an hour and 16 minutes, where we basically set up all of the teams and where they've all gone. But we end up with the climax of that sequence being Nebula's little projection and Thanos realizing that something is going on, right? He doesn't know what, but he's like, whatever, bring her to my ship or my workshop or whatever, you know? And so then we go into sequence 8, where we're basically tracking the New York timeline, the Thor and Rocket timeline, and then again, the Nebula timeline. And that runs from like 116 to just under the 90-minute mark. And again, we end with Thanos. We get another climax with Thanos when he realizes there are 2 nebulas, right? That's what he sort of figures out, and probably is beginning to realize that time travel is involved. And then we get to sequence 9. We actually don't go to New York at all. And this is pretty short. This is like a 9 or 10 minute sequence, like 88 minutes to 97 minutes. It's just Thor and Rocket for the first half. And then we go back to Nebula for the second half. And at the end, we're at the present day Nebula, who realizes that Thanos knows what's going on. He knows what they're doing. And she tries to send out a warning, but obviously, you know, there's nobody who's going to hear it. It's sort of too late. And it's sort of interesting, as the first 3 sequences are all partly about Thanos figuring things out as we're tracking the different teams doing their stuff. Then when we get to sequences 10 and 11, we actually stop jumping around as much as we had been referring to earlier. So sequence 10 is pretty short. I just have it as like 7 minutes, but it's basically Cap and Tony going back further in time into the 70s, right? But it's completely self-contained. It's sort of the first time since we've started the act that we haven't jumped between multiple teams for a significant chunk of time, right? We just stay with them the entire time until, you know, Tony's dad gets in the car, closes the door, drives off. And then we cut and we've got sequence 11, which is basically, you know, a little bit of Nebula, but mostly it's entirely Nat and Clint, right? And so it's their whole thing with very little cutting away. And it climaxes with everyone returning, you know, with the stones and then realizing Nat is dead. And then again, we have this really short sequence afterwards where, okay, they've quote unquote recovered from Nat dying. It's pretty quick, right? They grieve briefly and then it's sort of like, okay, who's going to do the stones? What's going to happen? And we've got, again, like a 7-minute, very short sequence where, you know, the stones work, Thanos attacks, And to me, that's the end of Act 3, and then Act 4 becomes, the beginning of Act 4. Sequence 13 is what you were talking about, Donovan. Everyone sort of scrambling around, but really the big thing then becomes the big three all attacking Thanos, and all failing, right? Despite all the big comic book moments, individually, it's not working, with the three of them.
I do want to point out too that this movie is interesting in that there's no, for a good chunk of the movie, not the first 10 minutes and not obviously the last, or I guess a chunk of the 30, the last 20 is kind of all like you said, Lord of the Rings. So about 40 minutes of the movie, there's like a clear antagonist, right? But a lot of it, there's not. And that's really interesting. Now, it gets away with it because, again, this is like part 2 of a larger movie. And they did such a good job setting up Thanos. And like, we kind of felt like he could have been the protagonist in the first movie, right? He's the one actively pushing the plot and getting stones, and they're all reactionary. But he's not really in the movie that much. He did such a good job of what he wanted to do in the first movie that he don't have to be here to feel his presence and to feel like he's still the big bad, even though, he's not there.
Yeah. And I do think that's part of why they take that plot line of nebulas, and in that sequence of 7, 8, and 9 in the first half of Act 3, that they keep coming back to him. They're setting him up, right, to return in the final act. And so, he can, obviously he's in a little bit of Act 1, but he can be gone for the first hour plus of the movie, but you have to start ramping him up a little bit. I think if somehow they had left him out of Act 3 entirely and he just came back for Act 4, it would feel a little weird. It would sort of feel like, oh, okay, now he's back, but so that return to him in the first half of Act 3 does just enough, right? We get 3 sequences where we're setting him up, figuring things out, which gives us that nice climax where just when everything's gone perfectly and everyone's back, he attacks and now he's there, Although ironically, if he had shown up 5 minutes earlier,
he wins.
I don't know what would have happened. What would have happened if he had attacked and I guess they were only gone instantaneously, huh? They would have not left yet. And so he would have, I don't know.
Well, then there seemed to be a couple hours.
How long were they gone? We don't know. If he'd shown up while they were gone and he'd blown up the machine, they would have forever been stuck in the past.
I mean, that would have been impossible though, because he only showed up because they left, and he can't show up in the 0 seconds in between leaving and.
Yeah. Well, you also wonder, why doesn't he just show up the same time they're all supposed to be there? That way, you know what I'm saying? Like, what's the benefit? Right? What's the benefit of him waiting for? Nebula goes. Nebula can't communicate to him, can she? Through time? Does she? I don't remember.
Because I don't know, but I don't think he knows. I think he just shows up when he shows up.
No, she lets him through. She lets him in the little thing they stand on. And he his ship pops out and breaks everything just because he
That's right. Okay, so yeah, she lets him do that. That fixes my plot hole. Well, let's dive into it, boys. So we got about 20 more minutes left in the pod before we have to wind things down, but. One of the biggest moments I've ever been in a movie theater. This movie had a lot of them, but the 2 we're fixing to talk about. One of them, like you said, Bruce, they're fighting Thanos and they're not winning, and Thanos is just wrecking shop. And we're getting some amazing stuff, like Thor shooting lightning into Iron Man and Iron Man shooting it back. Like that's why I exist, is to watch stuff like that happen. Yeah. But the thing we always knew, and then we got confirmed with, and you get the deafening cries of the audience members, is that Captain America is worthy. And he picks up the hammer, and it's one of the coolest moments ever in comic book history. And it has to be one of the biggest cheer moments ever in cinema history. Like, I don't know. Like, you can go on. It's so fun to go online on YouTube and watch theater reactions to these moments. Like, people just, me included, they just lost their shit, So
it's probably the loudest audience I've been in a movie theater for. Like, I remember some hoops and hollerings, seeing the prequels in theaters, when those were opening, and there was some, but nothing like the raucous cheers that were happening at times. It felt like you were almost at a sporting event, at times.
Yeah, it did.
It was.
It did. You're not wrong.
does that happen? Does he pick it up initially during their fight, or
That's in the first. That's in the fight they lose. Yeah,
That's in the fight they
he
lose.
gets it
yeah.
at the end too. But the initial first time he holds it, and he like looks up, and the camera pans up, and he charges at him, and he has this really badass like he beats his ass, and then it doesn't matter because he's Thanos.
Right.
Yeah. So,
but then he sort of has that second moment when Avengers assemble, which we'll get to in a second, where it flies back into his hand, right when they're about to attack. Okay.
So yes, Bruce. So the thing that all comic book people know is that Captain America yells "Avengers assemble" before they go out and wreck shop. And so whenever in 2012, when we were like, oh man, Avengers is coming out, like, this is a big deal, first of all, for us comic book nerds. We can't wait for Captain America to say this before they fight the big bad. And it never happened. And we were like, that was kind of odd. But it's such a fun movie. And then at the end of Age of Ultron, his last thing that says in the movie, he says Avengers, and then the movie cuts, and you're like, oh, what happened? So it's like this, they're like teasing this up. And I said for a long time, whenever these movies are announced, I said, what they should do is that they need to, they need to get whatever, everyone needs to be snapped away in the movie, and they come back. This needs to happen. So this has to happen. And so this has to happen.
The only issue I have, I love it. Like, it makes gives me goosebumps to hear it and watch it.
Don't give me issues, Daniel.
But the only issue is that it makes no sense to whisper Avengers Assemble to yourself.
They all have comms, dude. They've explained multiple times.
I guess so, but I mean, it's like, and every other time it would have been helpful. Like, hey guys, come over here. Oh, that's helpful. We that was a useful thing to say. Now we know what you want to do. In this case, we're already here. We're here, guys.
This is a case. Also, like I told Bruce last time in Infinity War, that it's so fucking cool. It don't matter about the plot.
It doesn't. I enjoy it all the same, but it is that like.
Well,
he almost said it more to himself. And
maybe he did, but let's back up. So you have Cap against the entire armada of Thanos and all the people coming in, like fixing to destroy the world.
Yeah.
And then you hear a little bit of magic dust happening.
No. The first thing you hear is on the left, right?
Well, you hear like the rustling of the magic dust, and you hear it through the comms, which I just told you about. You hear Sam Wilson on your left, which is also a great, amazing callback.
Yes.
And
I'm not sure. I need some fucking like comms that work like across the galaxy.
Well, if Tony Stark can invent time travel, he can make some damn good comms, Daniel.
Okay, fair.
So I think So of course, what was cool is you see Chadwick Boseman come back through, which even hits harder now when you watch it. He's the first one that comes through the portals. You see the Guardians of the Galaxy. You see Peter come back. You see everybody come back that we lost, right? And then you get the big hurrah moment of Giant Man bursting through with Hulk, and use Rocket Raccoon and a new War Machine armor, everything. The music's teeing up, which Alan Silvestri, again, he should have been nominated for an Academy Award or something for his music in Infinity War in this movie. I think he did an amazing job in his score, specifically even the Vormish stuff with Natalie and Clint. But probably one of the biggest moments in it is the biggest moment in comic history, but like in theaters, just being in there to see all that happen. And then to see him get the hammer and say the words, it's like I don't know how they can top it. That's like the thing. It's like when you do that, it's like, what do you do next to top it? There are ways to do it, but there's every way to screw it up. So it's like, I feel like in that moment, in the MCU, we peaked, and it's a beautiful thing, but also it's like, you'll never get to experience that moment ever again. Hope maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
The rest of the thing, and we could talk about all these individual moments, but it's fantastic. I think the most important thing to talk about is obviously Thanos versus Iron Man, right? Obviously they're playing catch with the Infinity Stones, the Infinity Gauntlet, and at the very end, Thanos gets the gauntlet, and Tony wrestles it with him, and he gets the gems. And I've been saying this for a long time in our classes and in our pods and everything, but there's nothing better than a good one-liner. And they teed it up with I am inevitable in the very beginning of the movie with Thanos. Past Thanos hears his future self say it, so he says it again to Tony. And then the best thing that Tony ever could have said is what he says in this movie. It's the same thing he said at the end of his first movie. And it's something that's been a mantra for the character without the MCU. And it's, I am Iron Man. And it's a perfect one. It's perfect. It's perfect. Like, how do you top that? And so, like, what an emotional moment, because when he's doing that, he knows it. Doctor Strange previously tells him, this is the one chance. This is what I was talking about. This is the one of the 14 million chances. This is the moment where you have to sacrifice yourself to save everybody. I killed myself so you could kill yourself later.
And I think my favorite part about it is that he's mocking him. He's being sarcastic. The line is literally saying, like, that sounds dumb. I'm Iron Man. It's like I do to my son when he's like, I'm hungry, and I'm like, I'm Dad. You know what I mean? It's like, it's almost like that kind of thing where he's like making these super dramatic things, and Tony's like, shut the fuck up. I'm Iron Man. It just feels like it is serious and is meaningful, but it sounds like something Tony would say, because it's still in that kind of like, I don't take anything, almost kind of like thing to, like, it's a sarcastic line in the, like, what he's kind of making fun of what Thanos has been saying to him. And I think that is kind of it really fits Tony, because that's who he is. He's this guy that is this, he's the talker. He's the one that's going to, like, has the zingers and the insults, and to not only go out on an iconic line, but to go out with a middle finger to the bad guy. I think that just fits Tony just too perfect.
Yeah. Well, a couple things. One, originally this is the last thing they reshot. They shot it like a couple weeks before the movie come out. You can tell because his hair looks a little different, and it's more of a green screeny kind of look to it all. The actual like the focal length is even different, so you can tell that shot is different. Originally, he didn't say anything at all. He just snaps his fingers, and they talked about, we wanted him to say a few things like, "Oh, snap," and snap his fingers or something like that. And it was horrible. And it was the editor that was like, "Man, something's missing here." And they end up getting Tony to come back, Robert Downey Jr., and he, in the same place he auditioned for Iron Man, is that they recorded this, and his last words in the MCU as of right now are, "I am Iron Man," that he recorded. But here's what a good one-liner. Not only is it seeded throughout the universe, but it's also a meta one-liner. Again, like, it's something that it speaks to us, to people who are watching it. And because also we know that it's like, why I figured it took me a long time. I talked to Daniel about this when me and him broke down Logan, Bruce, or talked about the movie a year or so ago. And I was really torn about watching that movie. Like, I was really hurt watching that movie because Logan dies at the end of it. And I couldn't figure out, why am I so attached to this person? Because, like, this character has been in my life since I was a kid. It's like it's a loved one. Like, I've spent so much time watching these movies and this character, and then watching them die. It's like someone dying for real in your life. And so the one-liner speaks on so many different levels. And it's heartbreaking, right? When he's there, and Rhodey and Peter, and then she finally says, "You can rest. We'll be okay." And it's pretty amazing. Tony laid on the wire so everyone could go over it.
It's good.
Yeah. So, of course, the movie, we go into, as Bruce said earlier, the 3 or 4 different endings, right? We pick up. What's kind of genius, though, is that it's the last thing that he says living, but Tony ended up recording a message for his daughter, right? And the message works as like me speaking to you as my daughter, and how, I care for you, and I want you to, know I'm thinking about you and all these things, and also to Pepper. But it also speaks about it speaks to the audience, is what it's doing, about the journey that we've been together as an audience members, and all the Reddit forums we've read, and the podcasts we've done on it, and the time, like, me assembling you guys to go watch movies together and going to Olive Garden and all those kind of things. Like, that's what he's talking to in that moment. To me, it's like he's talking about all the time we've spent together and how we're celebrating that, So anyway, I think it's pretty great. I love you 3000 is how he ends it, which is, it's perfect. It's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to add much more. I mean, I think of course, you're right, Bruce. It is of Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. It ends 3 times at least. But you know what? I didn't care when I was watching that movie. I don't care.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's not a criticism of the movie. No. I mean, it has a lot of things it has to wrap up, and
sure,
and it has to do it pretty quickly, right? I mean, this.
Yeah, I will say I do enjoy how much of kind of an epilogue we get with these characters. Is it epilogue? for after?
Yeah. I mean, it's
Okay,
just
right.
15 minutes worth. It's not just
Yeah.
5 minutes or so. It's a whole sequence all in its own 15-minute sequence of just all the wrap up.
Yeah.
And I think figuring out the order of how to do that was going to be important. And so we get sort of a lot of reunifications that are happy, and then we sort of take a break and we dwell on some sadness, and we have sort of the gathering at Tony's house, and all of the people who have come together in this moment of sadness, and then we have
Comic relief with Thor. A little more
Right.
humor squeezed in with
yeah,
Vero going off
and
with the
then we get
Guardians.
we get a brief moment where Scarlet Witch comes back, right, and she's
Hmm.
I think on the dock with
Clint, yeah.
Clint, and
Yes,
so they have this
that's
shared
right.
moment of having both lost someone. Sort of everyone got to come back except for you know
Vision.
Natasha.
Vision and Natasha. So we get that moment sort of right after the funeral, and then we go into sort of the final concluding thing where Cap is basically gonna end the movie for us on what I think a lot of
Bittersweet.
people like. So yes, a bittersweet ending, exactly, where he gets what he wanted. He spends his whole lifetime in sort of stays in the past and ages up to the present day, and it's sad because we know he's going to die now as an old man, but he finally got to go back and have the life that he would have wanted. So I think they figured out the right order of things to sort of wrap everything up on.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean the Cap scene, him going back with the hammer and all the stones. So first of all, there's a whole movie there. It's like, how did he get all the stones back? Correctly. He had to go talk to Red Skull or something to get him the Soul Stone back.
I just want to see that
That's
scene. I just want to
that's-
see that scene where he just
Yeah.
realizes Red Skull's there and he's like, "The hell
Yeah.
is?" Tries to
Yeah,
get him
what's
up for like
going on?
30 minutes
Yeah.
before he realizes what's going on. Yeah, to keep trying to
Yeah,
find.
yeah. So that's a whole thing there. But
Yeah.
Who helps him travel through space, or does he use the stones? He can just
I think he just goes
Who
back through the
knows?
same
pops
with the
around
pit
wherever he
particles,
wants.
right?
Yeah, I don't know. At that point, I'm crying too much. I got a headache from
Oh
crying.
yeah, I don't mean it as some like plot hole. I
Yeah.
just mean in terms of like the movie. Like what
Oh,
is
yeah.
that movie?
He steps
Like
back on the
who does he
platform, I
have
think,
to
in the
partner
suit,
with to
right?
return all the stones and
Didn't
everything?
he step
yeah.
back on the platform with the
Well,
same time?
He
Time
he
house?
did. He just I think he meant logistically, like how could he do it by himself, But
It
yeah, I
doesn't
mean, I
matter.
think what a perfect way to end the movie. Again, this is an arc that started, like I mentioned earlier, the two different paths. Tony is, Cap summed it up, right? You're the guy that's not willing to lay on the wire. Tony said, I'd just rather cut the wire, right? And he finally came to a wire he couldn't cut, and he decided to sacrifice himself for the greater good, and leave behind the things that he didn't want to leave behind. And Cap says, I decided to take a little bit of that piece of that life that Tony was talking about, and I think Cap probably earned it after the first movie, the first Avenger.
Yeah.
But he sacrificed and lost a lot. He lost a lot of time. He's a man out of time, as they say. And so to end the movie, not only passing the shield off to Sam and like just an amazing encounter, like this doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like mine. And like, well, it is. It is yours. And like just God tier acting and the music and everything. But then to end it, at that time was at the end of the MCU, right? We didn't really know the future projects. We didn't know that kind of stuff. But to end this phase, this saga, the Infinity Saga, on the thing that kind of starts the universe, right? Chronologically, is Cap wanting to dance with Peggy. To end it with, he finally gets his dance and he finally gets that kiss. What it's just like there's times where like, I can't make something better because, or I'm like, I can make that better. I can make that better. Can't make that better. That's perfect. They did great. They nailed it. They nailed the ending to the Infinity Saga. And I think it's a testament to the writers, the directors, and everything. And it's not a perfect movie, but the movie I always kind of said like Infinity War is like the finale, and then Endgame is kind of the cathartic epilogue. Like it's the thing we need to kind of move on to the next thing. But Infinity War is like the big like holy shit they did it, and then Endgame is like, it's what's left. So yeah. Is there anything else we need to talk about, guys, structurally in terms of some interesting things that the movie does before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, in a lot of ways, this final act is the most typical of all of the acts, in the sense
Sure.
that it is sort of our big action wrap up. Who's got three sequences, the first up till Avengers assemble, and then the big battle with all the Avengers, and then the conclusion, and epilogue, and I think it is the most classical act of, I think, of all the acts in the movie, because it is a unique movie in terms of where it is in the storytelling, and the unique challenges that it faced. So yeah, I mean, I think overall it is an interesting structure, but it works. It works well. It does what it has to do. It was interesting. I mean, I definitely opened my eyes in terms of some of the things that it does uniquely, and sort of seeing that there is a lot more of the personal storylines in this one than maybe I'd had even thought about until we broke
Yeah.
it down. Um, seeing how little action there is in the movie until the final act was another thing I hadn't really thought about until we broke it down. Um, so yeah, I think it was a hugely challenging movie. It was the kind of thing that probably had a lot more opportunity to go wrong than to go right. I mean, we know how many TV shows, that people are disappointed in the final episode, and sort of like they were going to face that similar thing of how do we hit all these moments. And, I compared it at the in our previous episode, I think, to Star Wars Force Awakens. And I think that movie did not really get it right in the end. I mean, whether you think it was overly criticized or not, I don't think people are sort of looking back on that as a classic movie. It could have been, right. There's no reason why the new Star Wars after whatever 15 or 20 years could have been this amazing thing. And I think it's just sort of another movie for most people at this point.
It could
but I
have
don't
been.
think this. Yeah, and I think this movie sort of faced a similar challenge in, like, we've set all this stuff up, and we've somehow got to wrap it up in a way that it's satisfactory without, getting too caught up in too many, I mean, I think with Force Awakens, it got caught up in so many fan moments that it sort of lost its balance, plot wise. And, and this movie's had that same that tightrope where it's sort of like, we've got to maintain a compelling plot, but we also have a lot of fan things and a lot of notes that we have to hit, a lot of character moments that we have to make sure we include and somehow meld that together. And I think they did a good job of it. I think that was a really challenging thing for them as filmmakers. And, I would be hard pressed for anyone to say you did not succeed at that, so.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say
I
these
agree.
Infinity War and Endgame as a whole, because again, it's impossible to talk about one without the other. They are essentially two parts of one whole thing.
Yeah.
I still go to say that neither of these had. It's not surprising that they are good. It's surprising that they are, I would say, amazing to me, right? That in terms of interesting, fast moving, like good paced plots, good acting, good, really fun kind of fan servicey moments mixed with really good heartfelt moments, kind of hitting just everything you need to hit, just like you need to hit it. Again, I think it's one of those things that before these movies come out, I thought there was no way that they could be anywhere close to as good as they ended up being. There was too many moving pieces. There's too many things that can go wrong in a simple movie that's a $5 million budget. How in the world can they get all these pieces to fit together and all work right? And they did. And I think you're right, Donovan. We're now in this place of, well, is this the peak? Is Endgame the peak? Can they rise to those heights again? And I like you. I'm more and more doubting that they ever might be able to. Maybe just in terms of also just some fatigue of that's coming in with some of the audiences. But all I'd say is, I think it's these movies are it's kind of cool now to not like the MCU, at least in like some of like the more hipster, like the art, the people that have matured don't like the MCU that is ruining cinema in America. But I still think that like they made two just like gargantuan action-packed superhero franchise movies, like a very meaningful moment for a lot of people. And I also got emotional in the theater. And I don't do that very often ever. And so, yeah, I think all in all, these two movies are just, they feel like a thing that we may not see again in any franchise for a long time, if ever, at least executed at this level of like doing it this well.
I will say, and not to end on a negative note, but just sort of some of the notes you were hitting there, Dan. I think that's one of the problems with building a studio around, this company, Marvel, that Marvel is its own thing, because eventually it's there. I mean, I know they've got a lot of comics, but we also know that they're going to have to either get deeper and deeper into stuff that audiences don't know or won't relate to, or they're going to sort of be forced into what DC is doing, which is to just in a couple more years reboot the same characters again. And then I think that makes them more open to the kind of criticism that you were referring to of, where we're just filling up movie theaters with the same IP over and over again. So I will be curious to see what they do, because I think they already discovered that, I think Disney discovered with Star Wars that, that wasn't going to work. And it seems somewhat over as a big screen phenomenon and is primarily existing as a small screen. Although I guess are they doing another set of original movies?
Yeah,
for
Ryan Johnson has a trilogy in theory.
Yeah.
Taika Waititi is doing.
That's not going to happen. I don't think. I mean, I don't know.
One or two.
I thought I saw something recently that it still was. I don't know.
Are they doing? I think they may be doing a trilogy like in the past, right? Are they doing like thousands of years ago?
No, they are working on a. It's supposedly supposed to be announced probably this upcoming summer after supposedly Kathleen Kennedy steps down as CEO from Lucasfilm after Indy 5 comes out. So we'll have more information on the future of Star Wars pretty soon. Bruce, we just did a pod on Andor. You should go watch Andor if you haven't watched it.
I've heard really good things about it. Yeah. But anyway, we've sort of seen the challenges that Disney has faced with the Star Wars universe. And I think increasingly, they're going to start facing some, not exactly the same, but challenges with the Marvel universe, and kind of where can you go with it, and what can you do with it, and can you really sustain it, or are they going to have to move into something else? And the whole point of buying Marvel is to have all of these pre-existing IP that they can go to, but they may end up having to like create new IP within the Marvel universe to keep the Marvel universe going. I mean, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what they do.
It will be.
It is interesting, and couple things. One, I mean, I don't know if this will, like Daniel, you said, this will happen again in our lifetime. I think maybe in our lifetime, but this movie was, when it came out at the time, the highest gross movie of all time at $2.7 billion. It only had like 5 or 10 million more than Avatar 1. Avatar recently retook that when it had its 3D re-release over this year, I believe, or actually maybe it was like last year, did one release and it came out again this year. Avatar 2 will not touch, I don't think, the $2.7 billion. It's possible, but I don't think it's going to happen.
It's getting great reviews early on, so
it is.
I agree with you that it probably won't hit that, because I think it's been too long, and there's a few other things that are working against it. But I
think it'll hit 2 billion, but 2.7 is hard. That's hard for anything, and it's anyway. That's another. We're reviewing that pretty soon, but I think we'll be back here again in like 4 or 5 years, Bruce, to break down Avengers Kang Dynasty, and more importantly, Avengers Secret Wars, which is, the culmination of the multiverse of like all the previous Marvel movies, the different Fox owned, that Sony owned, that Marvel Studios owned, all these other things, the culmination of all that, and we'll see if they can kind of match some of those things. They're really going to rely on nostalgia then, like Tobey Maguire and Hugh Jackman, to kind of come back and kind of make us feel something, which they did with No Way Home, and we already know that Hugh Jackman's coming back for Deadpool 3. So they can do it on some level, but we'll just see if they can accomplish what they accomplished with this. Bruce, it was always a pleasure to have you on. I really appreciate it. I'm glad we got to break it down. I could talk about this movie and other MCU things forever, and just also the state of the universe and everything indefinitely, but we'll have to save it for other time. But I appreciate you being on. How can our listeners find all the cool things that you do?
They can find me on Instagram at BDHutch. And of course, they can find me at thehutchfiles.com, where hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I'll have posted my sequence breakdown of this movie, and breakdowns of some of the other stuff that we've done on the podcast, and breakdowns of other movies I've just done for myself. So
awesome. And Daniel, how can our listeners find us?
Listeners, you can find us at bit.ly/2for1mail. Let us know what you thought of Endgame, the last half of Endgame, the last 4/7 of Endgame. And if you watch till the end of the last episode, you'll get that reference. So yeah, let us know what you thought of the rest of Endgame, of the Infinity Saga, of the Infinity Arc, or of, or the saga. I guess that's the saga is okay. Yeah. Just tell us something. Just say hi. bit.ly/2for1mail.
And if you can't say hi on our Bitly, you can always reach us in the comment section below, youtube.com/2for1studios, the best place to consume the content. Guys, episode 150 of Podcast 2 for 1. Bruce, I don't know if you know this, but we celebrated our 3-year anniversary a couple of weeks ago. So we've been in this for 3 years now. And I'm so glad that you've been on the show with us. And I hope we're still going to episode 241. We're getting there. So I hope that we're talking other movies, different genres over the next couple of years as we reach 241, and I hope we continue to talk, of course, some other these kind of movies, superhero movies, whatever. I'd love to break down the Batman with you sometime as well. It's not complicated.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure being on all these episodes. Congratulations for hitting 150 episodes. I mean, it's fantastic. I hope that we're doing this at episode 300. And it's funny because if I remember correctly, I think the first time we did one with the three of us, we talked about 1917, and we talked about the sort of the Oscar possibilities around that time. And that must have been, based on what you were saying about 3 years, that was fall of 2019. So that was right before the pandemic hit us a couple of months later. So yeah, I mean, it's
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's been a while. It's 3 years, but 3 years is both a short time and a long time, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. Yeah. 100%. It feels like it happened yesterday, and then also it feels like it happened 2 million years ago, But anyway, it's always a pleasure again. I can't wait for episode 300 with you, Bruce. Daniel, episode 150. Congratulations, bud.
Thank you.
My name is Donovan Thompson.
I'm Daniel Wingfield.
I'm Bruce Hutchinson.
And we have spoken.